All right, so maybe you're thinking about checking out David Goggins and his book, Can't Hurt Me, but you're not really sure if it's going to be worth your time.
Yeah, it's one of those,
Right.
you see it everywhere. You see people talking about it, and you're like, is this really as good as everyone says it is?
Exactly. And there are so many self-help books out there.
Oh, yeah.
So many, and some are definitely better than others. And that's exactly why we're doing this deep dive today. We're cutting through all the hype to help you figure out is Can't Hurt Me the right fit for you? Is this something that you should actually spend your time on?
Totally. And to do that, we've gone to Goodreads and we've looked at a whole bunch of reviews from people who loved this book and from people who really didn't like it.
Yeah, from those super fans to the hardcore critics.
Exactly.
So we can give you like the full picture.
Yeah.
Okay, so for someone like me, who's maybe heard of Goggins but doesn't really know much about him, where do we even begin with this guy?
I think the best place to start is with his story because his story is really the foundation of the whole book, and it's a pretty wild one.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So Goggins had like a really brutal childhood, but he was able to transform himself
Wow.
from like an overweight young guy
Yeah.
into a Navy SEAL, an ultramarathon runner, and a motivational speaker.
So clearly,
That's the real deal.
like he walks the walk.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so this push your limits thing we hear about,
Yeah,
that's kind of like his trademark, right?
it is.
But is it just about these extreme physical challenges?
That's a great question.
Like, is it relevant if I'm not training for like, some crazy ultra marathon or trying to become a Navy SEAL?
Right. And that's where I think it gets really interesting because Goggins uses his experiences as a way to illustrate his what he calls his 40% rule.
Okay, the 40% rule.
So he believes that most people only tap into 40% of their true potential.
Wow, only 40%?
Only 40%, he says, that the other 60% is locked away by fear and self-doubt and what he calls the governor, which is that little voice in your head that tells you to stop when things get hard.
Okay, so it's more about mental toughness than physical endurance.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. He argues that by pushing past that pain, both physical and mental, you can break through those limits and achieve things that you never thought were possible.
So it's like rewiring your mind to embrace discomfort.
Totally embrace the suck, he calls it.
Embrace the suck.
Yeah.
Okay, I can see why this book gets people fired up, but I have to admit, the whole embrace discomfort thing sounds a little intense. Can you give me an example of what that actually looks like in the book?
Yeah, so one technique that Goggins talks about is using what he calls cookie jars, which are basically mental reminders of past struggles that he uses to motivate himself.
Oh, that's interesting.
So let's say you're facing a really tough challenge at work. Instead of giving in to that pressure, you're going to visualize a time where you overcame a major obstacle in the past. And you're going to tap into that feeling of resilience
Okay.
and use it to push through the current challenge.
So it's like harnessing that past pain to fuel your current efforts.
Yeah.
I can see how that could be really powerful, but I'm also wondering about the writing style. I've heard it could be pretty raw.
Goggins definitely doesn't sugarcoat things. His writing is very direct. He uses a lot of strong language, so some readers find it refreshing and authentic,
Right.
but others are definitely put off by it. So just be prepared for a pretty intense in-your-face style.
Okay, so it's not exactly a light beach read,
No.
but how does it compare to other self-help books out there?
Okay.
I'm thinking of books like Mindset by Carol Dweck, which is all about, believing in your ability to grow, or Atomic Habits by James Clear, which focuses on building those good habits.
Right. Those are both great books, but Goggins' approach is definitely more experiential. So while Mindset and Atomic Habits are grounded in research and offer more structured frameworks,
Yeah.
Can't Hurt Me is more about Goggins sharing his personal journey
Okay.
and the lessons that he's learned along the way.
So it's less about theory and more about that real-world application.
Exactly. He's not just talking about these abstract concepts. He's giving you a front row seat to his own transformation and the often brutal methods that he used to achieve it.
So think of it less as a self-help manual and more as like a raw and unfiltered memoir
Yes,
of someone who pushed themselves to the absolute limit.
totally.
Okay, that makes sense, but let's get real here.
Yeah.
No book is perfect.
What are some of the criticisms that reviewers had about Can't Hurt Me?
One of the criticisms that comes up pretty frequently is the repetition. Goggins tends to hammer home the same points multiple times throughout the book. So it can be
Right.
motivating for some, but others find it a bit tedious.
So maybe not the most nuanced read. Right. And there's another criticism that we need to address, and it's a serious one. Several reviewers, especially women, found Goggins' language to be offensive and frankly misogynistic.
Yeah.
There are instances where he uses derogatory terms for women and equates weakness with femininity.
That's disappointing to hear.
It is, and it raises serious concerns about whether his message is truly empowering for everyone.
Okay, so we've got a mixed bag here. Incredible life story. A focus on mental toughness, but also some potentially problematic language. And a tendency to be repetitive, it sounds like Can't Hurt Me, is a pretty polarizing book.
It definitely is, and that's what makes this deep dive so important. We're here to help you weigh the pros and cons and decide if this book aligns with your values and goals.
Yeah, does this actually sound like something you want to read?
It is, and it's something that, we wanted to bring up because it's something that you should definitely be aware of as you're making that decision.
Right, for sure.
So,
Yeah.
but, we've talked about some of the criticisms. What about the positives?
Yeah.
Like, what are some of the things that reviewers found valuable in this book?
Exactly.
Well, a lot of the reviewers, even the ones who had those criticisms, found Goggins' story incredibly motivating.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard not to be inspired by someone who went from, such a difficult background to achieving these really incredible things.
Right. His story is definitely remarkable, but, is there anything beyond just that inspiration factor?
Sure.
Did any of the reviewers talk about specific ways that they applied Goggins' ideas to their own lives?
Yeah, absolutely. One reviewer mentioned how Goggins' emphasis on self-reflection really helped them identify and overcome some limiting beliefs that they had been holding on to for years.
Wow.
And they said by confronting those fears and insecurities head on, they were able to make, significant progress in both their personal and professional life.
So it's not just about pushing through physical pain. It's about pushing through those mental and emotional barriers as well.
Yeah, and Goggins argues that our minds are often our biggest obstacles. We create these self-imposed limitations that prevent us from really reaching our full potential. And he provides some specific strategies, like the cookie jar technique we talked about earlier, to help readers kind of break free from those limitations.
Yeah, the cookie jar concept is interesting. It does seem like a really practical way to use past experiences, to kind of fuel your present motivation.
Yeah.
But I'm also wondering about that balance between pushing yourself and knowing when to rest and recover.
Right.
Goggins seems to be all about, pushing limits, but doesn't he also acknowledge the importance of recovery?
He does. He actually stresses the importance of sleep and nutrition and taking time to recharge. His point is that recovery is essential for sustained growth. You can't constantly push yourself to the limit without burning out.
Yeah.
So it's about finding that sustainable rhythm of effort and recovery.
Okay, so it's not just about this relentless pushing. It's about pushing intelligently.
Exactly. And it's about understanding your own limits and knowing when to push and when to pull back.
Right.
Goggins emphasizes the importance of listening to your body and your mind and kind of adjusting your approach accordingly.
It's such a crucial point, especially in today's culture of hustle and grind all the time.
Yeah, totally. It's about finding a sustainable approach to self-improvement that works for you, not blindly following someone else's blueprint.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about Goggins' story, his focus on mental toughness and some practical techniques that he offers. But I'm curious, did any reviewers compare Can't Hurt Me to other books in the self-help genre?
They did. Several reviewers drew comparisons to other popular books like Unbeatable Mind by Mark Divine,
Okay.
which also emphasizes mental toughness and resilience, but frames it within a more spiritual context.
Okay.
Others compared it to The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday,
Right.
which draws on Stoic philosophy to provide a framework for overcoming challenges.
Interesting. So how does Can't Hurt Me kind of stack up against these other books? Does it offer anything unique?
I think what sets Goggins apart is his raw and unapologetic style.
Okay.
He's not afraid to be vulnerable and share his struggles, even the ones that might make him look bad. And this authenticity, I think, is what resonates with a lot of readers. He's not presenting himself as some sort of guru. He's just a guy who's figured out how to push himself further than he ever thought possible and is sharing what he learned along the way.
So it's less about these polished theories and more about just gritty reality.
Yeah.
And for some people, that's exactly what they're looking for.
Right.
Just like a real unfiltered account of what it takes to overcome those challenges and achieve these extraordinary things.
Exactly.
But let's be honest. Goggins' methods are not for everyone.
No.
His extreme approach and harsh language can definitely be off-putting to some people.
For sure. And as we discussed, his language can be problematic, particularly his derogatory comments toward women. So this is something to consider carefully before you decide whether or not to read this book.
Right. It's essential to find those resources that align with your values and personal preferences.
Yeah.
That there are many paths to self-improvement, and what works for one person might not work for another.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations and explore these different perspectives.
Yeah.
It helps us to make more informed decisions about what we choose to consume and how we choose to grow.
Okay, so as we wrap up our analysis of Can't Hurt Me, it's clear this is a book with both strengths and weaknesses.
Right?
It offers this powerful message about mental toughness and pushing limits, but it's also important to be aware of the potential downsides.
Hmm.
So with all that in mind, what's the final verdict is Can't Hurt Me, a book worth recommending?
Well, it depends.
Okay, I figured you might say that, but let's break it down a bit more. Who do you think would actually benefit from reading this book?
I think this book is probably a good fit for someone who's looking for a serious kick in the pants. A no excuses approach to achieving your goals.
Okay.
Like if you're feeling stuck and you need some tough love to get moving, Goggins' message might really resonate with you.
And on the flip side, who should probably steer clear?
If you're looking for a gentler, more nuanced approach to self-improvement, or if you're sensitive to strong language, this book might not be the best choice.
Yeah.
And as we discussed, Goggins' use of derogatory language toward women is a serious concern.
Right. Definitely something to consider. So it sounds like Can't Hurt Me is a powerful but potentially problematic book.
Yeah,
It offers valuable insights into mental toughness, but comes with some baggage that might not sit well with everyone.
exactly. It's all about finding the right resources that align with your values and your personal preferences. What works for one person might not work for another.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the key takeaway for our listeners?
I think the biggest takeaway, regardless of whether you choose to read this book or not, is that we all have untapped potential.
Yeah.
Goggins' story, even with its flaws, is a reminder that we're often capable of far more than we think.
That's a great point. It's about pushing those self-imposed limits and discovering what we're truly capable of achieving.
Exactly. And it's about finding the right approach for you. Maybe it's Goggins' hardcore method. Maybe it's something completely different. The key is to keep exploring, keep growing, and never stop pushing those boundaries.
I love that. So even if Can't Hurt Me doesn't end up on your reading list, we hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought and maybe even inspired you to take on a new challenge or approach life with a bit more grit and determination.
Absolutely. And remember, self-improvement is a journey, not a destination. There's always something new to learn, always room for growth.
Well said. That's a wrap on our deep dive into Can't Hurt Me. We hope you found it insightful and maybe even a little bit inspiring. Until next time, keep exploring, keep growing, and never stop pushing those boundaries.